Django and Twitter, Bootstrap, build them fast and furious. I don't quite know what that means, but it sounded cool when I was making the deck, so I figured I'd put that in here. Legal stuff. So what I want to go through today is just give you guys, there's been a lot of talk about these large frameworks and how to build large software systems. Not every software system you're going to build is going to be enormous. And for those that aren't going to be enormous, there's tools that you can use that you can really build stuff quickly and effectively. And I wanted to go through some of the ones that I like. I'm going to talk a bit about Django, but first I'm actually going to keep it broad to just the general backend frameworks that, the whole ecosystem that's out there. So we'll talk a little bit about framework selection, including my experience, how to set up for success, and how not to do the things that I did that really didn't cause success. Go through Django, some of the reasons why it's cool, go through some extras, and then go through what Bootstrap is and why you might want to do that. And I couldn't, of course, be at this conference without jumping onto the latest topic fad du jour. So a quick note also on microservices, which don't exist, and API endpoints, and how this actually works very nicely with some of the concepts that have been talked about a lot at the conference. So to start with, I'm not sure how many of you guys are in web design or web development, but it's actually a very, very busy field these days. There's frankly too many decisions to be made before you even start, because you're going to be doing a backend framework, front-end framework, you're going to have caching layers, databases, there's too many things to be decided. Once you're starting to make a decision, there are too many options in each. It's not as though it's just, am I going to use Django or Ruby on Rails? There's literally dozens, if not hundreds, of frameworks you can choose from, and that's just the backend. Each of these decisions will have hundreds of choices you can go through, and there's more being released every day. I was on Hacker News while I was waiting before. Someone else just released another Bootstrap alternative. So literally, there's more of these every single day. And lastly, when you're trying to consider what's best for me, there's too many variables to consider, because each of these is going to be, there's so many things you can look at. So I want to help and go through some of the different options that you guys might have and how you can go through it. But first, before we do that, looking at this, you might say, forget all this then. I'll just do it myself. The first rule of the don'ts is don't roll your own. There's a couple of reasons why not. The first I'd say is your goal is to build a product. Your goal is not to build a web framework. Yes, you're going to have to learn a web framework, but if you're going to try to roll your own, you're essentially building a web framework, and there's such an overhead that comes from that. And you really don't want that. You're essentially creating, as I say, technical debt for that. The other thing which you're going to have to worry about is the security bugs. When you're dealing with the web, there's a huge history of all the vulnerabilities that are out there. And you really, really don't want to fall into that. And some of them are very easy to fix. Some of them are a little bit more sophisticated. And the frameworks that are out there, all the large frameworks, are able to already handle those. You really don't want to have to recode that all by yourself. Another option is, well, I know this one, so let's go with that. You're on a team, and you really don't want to just say, I like that. Go for the one that makes sense for the team. And how do you choose that? Well, let's get to that. So when you're choosing this, you're going to have to start by arguing to your team, why do you guys want to use this? What's in it for you? So I'll argue that for a backend framework, such as Django, there's three main things you're going to get. First, faster. Even taking into account the learning curve, and we'll talk about how to do training in a little bit, even taking into account the learning curve, you're going to be way faster in development by using a mature framework. It gives you a tremendous amount of power, and certain things that are more sophisticated to set up, even some stuff which you would call server maintenance, are already built into these frameworks. The second thing is more capable. These tools not only have built in an enormous amount of power, these all have tremendous ecosystems. So if you're trying to do something, the first question you should always ask, and I'll emphasize this again later, is this something which most likely someone else would also want? If the answer is yes, Google it first, because chances are someone has made it and has released it, and you can download it for whatever the framework you want is. The third is security, and I keep on harping on that, not only because I work for CERT, but the web has a lot of well-known vulnerabilities, and you really want to make sure that you're not falling into those traps. There's two kinds of front-end frameworks, for those of you who aren't familiar. The first one is a layout one to make it look good. A front-end framework like Bootstrap or something similar will make you look professional for exceedingly cheap. There's really, I think most of them come with one kind of overarching principle you have to get to. I'll teach that a little bit later on, but it will make you look professional at almost no cost. And once I show it to you, once you start to think about what I'm showing you, you'll realize that a vast majority of the websites that you're looking at are actually taking advantage of a Bootstrap framework. And at the end is just, three guys in a bathroom. Front-end framework, the interactivity, the front-end framework for that, and again, those of you who know React, Ember, Handlebars, Angular, those sorts of things, they give you interactivity. I'm not going to be talking about that at all today. So if you like that, I've just started using React, very cool, blah, blah, blah. It's a bit more complex, there's a lot more nuances, and the cost-benefit trade-off, you're going to look very cool, but it takes time to develop. So we'll leave that there. And the goal is you want to look like this wonderful person, not like this hobo. Okay, so let's get into how do you choose a framework. I have these in order of importance, and I'll go through why I put them in this order in a minute. First off, start with what would the organization support. Obviously, if it's a one-man shop, go with what you like. But if you're going to work in a larger organization, this has to be the first question. And the reason is because if you go through all the other stuff, and then you go to your IT department and say, we decided to use Ruby on Rails, or we want to use this Microsoft framework, and they're like, sorry, we don't support that, then you're hosed and you're just wasting an awful lot of time. And quite frankly, the evangelizing of getting people to like what you're trying to sell is an amount of effort that you're going to have to take into consideration. That's not a small feat. So definitely start with what are we allowed to use. Obviously, I don't talk about Django here, but work with what you can. The next one is, what does your team already know? The worst scenario to be in is where you're not only learning a framework, but you're also learning a language. So if you guys, for some reason, really like Ruby on Rails, but no one knows Ruby, even though Ruby on Rails is really, really powerful, you probably want to avoid it because it's difficult to learn. First of all, there's a whole language to learn. Second of all, when you're doing a framework and a language, it's very frequent. I've seen this with myself and with others. You start to confuse what is the language and what's the framework. And then when you're developing without the framework, hey, I expected this to be here, but you've trained yourself wrong. The third is what best suits your needs. So I'm going to jump to my experience with Highmark for a second to emphasize this one. So when I was working at Highmark, a large insurance company in Pittsburgh, health insurance company, we went through this checklist. We got to, what does the organization support? Python, awesome. What does the team already know? They all knew Python. That was great. So what will best suit our needs? We started going through, because within Python, as I said, there's a whole lot of frameworks. We needed something which was able to authenticate against the system. They had their own single sign-on. We needed to be able to authenticate with that. And we needed SaaS integration. So we went through. Django definitely offered the backend authentication. Nothing offered SaaS. So great, we went with that. But the reason why I put this one third is because at the end of the day, all the very large frameworks, again, the community is so enormous that if you need something in one, it's probably likely in another one. So I really recommend going down in this direction. If at the end of the day you go through this and you still have 20 options, choose the most popular one. You will not go wrong that way. These are very mature frameworks, and the popularity is only doing them good. The less critical ones, I'll call those, these are things which you will think to ask, and with a framework like this, it's probably not worth asking. The ability to scale, why is that not worth asking? Because all the frameworks have approximately the same ability to scale, and that is up to about 1 million users a month. And you'll see stories about people who tweak the heck out of it and they were able to get past that to some random number. But all of these are going to have similar metrics there. So because of that, don't spend too much time worrying about it. Most likely, it's all going to be about the same. Same thing with framework speed. All of these are interpreted. I don't know much about Java and C. I'm sure there's frameworks there as well, and it's the same exact concept. They're all going to, there's an overhead just for using just for the fact that you're using a framework. So unless you really are having enormous amounts of users, and this is the sort of thing you need to optimize, I wouldn't recommend that. Cool. Okay. This is going to look like a very minimal approach to how to do training, and that's very intentional. So when we started rolling this out at Highmark, the first thing I had everyone do was do the tutorial for Django. Why just do the tutorial? Why not more, why not less? Because everyone knows Python, and all we're doing is saying, here are some core concepts that you're going to need to learn. If you spend any time learning more than this, you're probably overstudying, because Google is there and Stack Overflow is there. Django happens to have the best documentation I have ever seen on any project, which is incredible. They have examples, they have code, they have whatever you're looking for, it's all there. It's a very, very well-documented project. And as I said, there's so much being developed with it, you can find it. Bootstrap. I did a very bad job loading my team up onto Bootstrap. I'm going to show you what I wish I did. But the first thing you need to do is understand the grid. I'll go through that in more detail later. Once you understand the grid, then just look through the docs, because you'll see the docs, you'll see what can be done. You'll keep in your head, oh, when I'm making a button, I should do this. When I'm making a list, nav bar, so on and so forth. If you do this right, literally 1 day, and you're done with training. Because now your team who knows Python understands what Django is, the very basics, and they'll go from there. Cool. Any questions before I go on? Great. All right. So let's give a little bit of an example here. And we're going to actually start tying into some of the concepts about services. So let's say I want to make an app. Okay? I decide that I think webmail clients are pretty cool. So I'm going to build a webmail client. So any modern webmail client is going to have at least 3 things. It's going to have the mail part. It's going to have the to-dos part, because mail brings to-dos. And it's going to have calendars, because you're going to get things you're going to want to pay attention to. So that's 3 apps, right? In addition, at least in this view, there's 3 separate views that I'm going to need to code in, right? So you can see there's different apps. Each app is going to have their own set of views that's going to need to be required. So what I want to do is give you at least a taste of why I think Django is a very useful language for building something like this. I keep on talking about Django. I want to emphasize most of this is probably true for other popular frameworks as well. So take the concepts rather than the language specifics. So Django starts off with the concept called a project. What's a project? Well, if you think back to the context of the talk about microservices, it is your product. The overall everything you are building is one project. To make a project in Django, it's pretty straightforward. I just type that one line, start project. What that gives me is a backend namespace database, namespace that every single application under that project is going to be separate. It gives me a test web server to play with it, and it gives me a settings file and some other fun stuff. Manage.py is the app you use. You'll see me reference that a little bit. Let's say I want to make an app. We can call that a service for this context here. It's pretty straightforward. You just build an app. And let's say I want to make 2 more apps. I just toss all that stuff out. Boom. So now, in the context that we were talking about before, I want to build services. Each of these is totally separate from each other. And if I want to have each of them with its own API that the other ones interact through, that's very easy to set up. So I've now made 3 apps that are all tied together in one large project. I can connect them as tightly as I want, or I can keep them very loosely coupled. When I do this, what I get is a skeleton file structure that has everything around it. Now, in the context of building a web app, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are, but very frequently, actually, let me get this in the context of another relevant story. I work for this company called 2Press. In 2Press, it offers up video galleries, right? So we have our main 2press.com domain. But within that, we have the support site, we have the community site, we have the actual product, we have the front page, we have payments. We wrote this whole thing in a PHP backend 10 years ago. The way it's set up right now, each of those is literally a separate server, which is tied together using some complex server management ideas, which is kind of difficult to manage. Within Django, the way I include all these apps in my app is just by going like this: email, to do, cal, that's it. Now all my apps are set up. They're included in this one large project. And the way I send them, I point different parts of the website to them is literally this. I just say regular expression. If it comes with an email, send it to email and let email figure out what to do with it. If the URL includes to do, send it to the to-dos. I've now literally just created this entire app, and I haven't even picked up my tea's not even cold yet. So, I mean, this is a pretty powerful way of structuring it. For what it's worth, let's say I found online, and this actually happened a few times, I found online there's a cool application that handles logins, or that handles to-dos, and I don't want to have to write the whole thing myself. I download that app, and I just write to-do here. Make sure that the file path knows where it is. That's it. So incorporating these different services gets really straightforward. It's a very powerful feature that lets you code in. I can give each team their own thing to work on. It's wonderful to work with. How many people here are familiar with ORM? A little. OK, good. I was very nervous. Everyone would be like, raise their hand. I'd be like, shoot, I can go home now. So you're going to have to interact with the database, right? So Django gives you a very interesting way of setting this up. I came from a world before where you're going to build a database, you go in SQL, create table, yada, yada, yada. Django handles this totally differently. You have a models.py file. Okay, you start off with the import, I bring in the Django construct, right? Let's say I want to build a table. What do? I simply define a class. And you notice here that I have, car and car field and date field and all that fun stuff. Those are each going to be columns in my table. For what it's worth, there's many, many different types of column types that I can support within Django. This is just a partial list, actually. I think I cut it off at F. You can imagine it goes down through the floor. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And this is my table. So what Django supports is this thing called migrations, where I type make migrations, and it creates a file that represents the changes to the database that are stored in here. So since the last time I ran migrations, it'll look at my models.py file, it'll see what's changed, and it'll make a special file. I then run migrate. The database is updated with all my changes. So think about how awesome that is. If I want to add a new table to my application, I literally just create a little bit of text, make migrations migrate, the table's updated. If I want to do remote foreign keys, or if I want to do one-to-one relationships, or who knows how complex it gets to go, it'll handle that. Let's say I accidentally delete something that I shouldn't. It'll warn you. I mean, the system is very intelligent about what it's doing, but it makes developing something like this super quick. So now that I have my models.py file up top, right? And I want to actually start coding into it. So the way you can access an object, take a step back. For those of you who don't exist in the web world, calling from a database is a very risky thing because there's a lot of possibilities for security bugs. So Django has tried to take as much of that away from you as possible. Don't call the database. We will handle every single SQL query. All you have to do is use our bundled package, so to speak, as to how you interact with it. So what this says is, email, go to that table, and I want to create to, from, date. You can basically read that and understand what I'm saying, and hit go, and now that's an entry in the database. Pretty straightforward. Let's say I want to retrieve one. Email.objects.filter, it'll find all things in the email table that have this particular item. I can set a subject. If I want to set a subject line, I can save it, I can delete it. All this interactivity is done programmatically. Then when I'm doing this in the program and I'm writing code that supports, I'm going to do a post, right? Some guy submits a form and I'll do a post and it sends it back. It's just straightforward to add this all in. And it takes care of a lot of the security bugs that you might have to worry about. One other nifty feature, which I've actually taken advantage of a lot lately, so let's say I built my whole table, right? And I have this whole database and it's complicated and whatnot. Django comes with, as I said, there's many tools in the ecosystem. One of the tools is it will build for you exactly all the dependencies through your database. So what you see here is, and let me see if I can get this right, I have a table here. This table is a foreign key to that. This table is a foreign key to that, so on and so forth, so on. It's also calling a user table that exists outside my app, but it points out the reference. If I wanted to, I could actually map the whole thing out using this tool. The ability to build this, I can then just one line, print cool picture and hand it to someone, and now they understand exactly what it is I've done. So that's a pretty useful feature, which we've used quite a lot as well. So that's kind of a whirlwind tour. Where am I? Well, not bad. So that's kind of a whirlwind tour for at least some of the base functionality within Django. There's a couple things I haven't talked about. So the first one is views.py. If I'm going to have a web page, obviously it has to do something, right? So I've talked a lot about the database part. Views.py is, how does the actual page work? When someone goes to a page, what does it do? So there's a whole lot of code there. There's a lot of tools that it provides to assist with getting information out from the query, server type, all sorts of fun stuff there. Forms.py, for those of you who have done web work, dealing with forms is a common pain in the butt. Everyone has to do it, and it's always a pain. You have to clean it and whatnot. So it provides a whole framework to make sure that you're cleaning all the data properly, you're not having anything security bugs in there, and whatnot. Templates. There's a standard structure for building web page templates. It sort of just gives you the standard HTML with some additional stuff on top so that if you need to iterate, you can iterate, and all sorts of fun stuff there. As well as tests. It brings an entire testing framework that, for what it's worth, will actually build a test copy of your entire database, populate it with data if you want it to, run a whole bunch of tests, and then delete the test database so it's not even working on real data. So there's a lot of functionality that it brings along with it. Okay. What was the next one here? Yeah. Any questions so far? Cool. Okay. I'm going to do this pretty quickly, actually. The long and the short of it is, let's say I just made those tables. I didn't make anything else. So Django was actually originally built by a publishing company, so it says on their website. And their goal was to make it really fast to update these tables. So if I make those tables do nothing else and add one line of code in a file called admin.py, I get a whole lot of stuff for free. So everything I'm going to show you here, I did not code. The program just gives it to you as part of their admin interface. So I made these two tables. I actually did this all in about 5 minutes. I built these two tables, and then I put them in the admin.py. It automatically gives me a way to see these tables. I can look up if there was data in it. There would be a list of all the data in the table here, and I get a way to add new objects to it. Let me see if I actually have that. Yeah, for a more complex table, this will all be there as well. And it'll read the data type and give you the appropriate input form type. So if all you need is a backend form, which is going to be used by people on the backend, internal to the company, this sort of thing is incredible. Because literally, you just build the table structure, write that one line in admin.py, and you're home free. And for what it's worth, you can actually customize it quite a lot. So the admin view has a lot of ways to make it look more sophisticated. I haven't actually dealt much within this, but there's a lot you can do with it. Pretty cool. The last thing on that, I think just this one slide. Django comes with the tool that doesn't come with it. One of the plugins is called JNoRest Framework. Long story short, you can build full RESTful APIs using Django. The same style of coding as I showed you before. You coded up the database by writing all the different columns you want. You can code up an API by using all the all the elements you want to the API, or you can even just say, look at my model and just build an API off the model. So it gives you a lot of power. And again, the whole point here is build stuff quickly. All right, that's Django. So now that I've given that background, now you can look at this and say, all right, now I'm going to build a backend framework. How about the front end? Let's say I want it to actually look good. How do I do that real fast? So let's go a little bit. What is Bootstrap? Bootstrap gives you, it's a set of CSS, essentially, a little bit of JavaScript. It gives you UI consistency, and it uses well-known UI concepts. And it gives you something which has been proven to actually look good. Twitter developed it, for those of you who aren't familiar, and they put a lot of work into it. There's an incredible ecosystem around this as well. So just to give you an idea, here is this thing called Wrap Bootstrap. It's a store. You can buy these. And just to emphasize, there are 37 more pages. On each page, there's like 40 of these. And that's just one store, right? 31 pages. There's tons of these. I'm going to go through a little bit how this works, and then you can start to picture how easy it is to make something which looks incredibly sophisticated just by updating your HTML tags. All right, so the first thing we need to go through is the grid. Think of the grid as a newspaper, because this actually comes from a newspaper. Forget what's on the content here. So looking at this newspaper, what you can see is this is actually 6 columns in a grid. Each of these is in its own column, and this spans 4 columns. This one down here, this is a 2-column spread. This is a 3-column article with a 2-column picture and a 1-column text. Keeping that in mind, that's how Django works. So when I'm going to try to build something, you can see, actually, let me start with one thing. And I said Django, I meant to say Bootstrap. Bootstrap gives you 12. It's 12 columns. The reason they give you 12 is because you can split that up in an awful lot of very pretty ways. So one you can see here, put a column in everything. So if I do this, I will automatically get that. A couple things to note. Margins are taken care of. Padding is taken care of. It'll actually, by default, give you even a little bit of text markup to make it look pretty. Let's say I do the next one, row. So this is a 8-width row and a 4-width row. Notice the spacing again. The spacing is all handled automatically to make it, the layout will look good with minimal effort on your part, and so on and so forth. Once you understand that, each of these is wrapped in a row, and then you just put the columns should add to 12. Once you understand this part, everything else is syntactic sugar. To give you a little bit of an idea as to what other sorts of things it can handle, you've probably seen many websites with widgets that look like these. If you've ever seen a widget, a site with this kind of widget, it's built on Bootstrap, or something that's cloning Bootstrap. All of this stuff is literally just a little bit of syntactic sugar. Great. To avoid having to go through all the stuff there, here's the kind of things that it can support. If this sounds cool, I strongly recommend just go to the website, browse through it. You'll see it has a ton of different widgets that you can incorporate into your website, basically for free. And as I said, it's really, you're just going to include the Bootstrap CSS. If you want to use some of their JavaScript, they have some of that as well. But otherwise, it's really just put all these fun toys in here. It can make your site going from looking like this, which is just the default layout, to something like this, which honestly, I didn't even know you could do that until I was reading over the straps. You can have that little dollar figure thing. It looks sophisticated. If you don't care to look sophisticated, you probably don't need it. If you do, this is a very easy way to do so. The last thing I wanted to emphasize was, again, talking about the ecosystem. This is a thing I bought, I guess. It actually was a free one. It's just another thing you can put on top of Bootstrap. So it's the same exact kind of markup. Everything you see here is just here to demonstrate how it can work. So you see badges, you see little circle pictures, you see all the little doohickeys up for the menu, this big, whatever you call that banner up here, the plots, the bars. All of this is stuff demonstrating you can do this with just HTML markup. They have the same kind of support for forms and all this fun stuff, but the long and the short of it is all of this comes free when you're using a tool like Bootstrap. So, not relevant. So, end of my spiel. The takeaway that I want you guys to get from this talk, if you use a framework like this, it'll save you an enormous amount of time and effort, and you'll get a lot of built-in security to boot. You really don't want to roll your own. If you roll your own, you're going to create problems for yourself, create hassles for yourself. You guys are not in the business of making frameworks, you're in the business of making useful stuff, and other people did the framework for you, so really take advantage of it. Django and other modern frameworks have a lot of tools that you can use to build up stuff really quickly, and if you use Bootstrap, that's a great way to look professional. I work at CERT, phone number, contact info, UI canal, and a bunch of social stuff. That's the spiel. Any questions?
Any questions for Ellie?
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, sure. Let me bring you the microphone.
I wanted to ask about in the database section, can you do validation and stuff? So it's pretty easy to create your database. Is there tools available to validate what?
So it's actually more so. I didn't go into the forms part so much. When you define the database column, it knows what type of data is supposed to go in there, and it will automatically enforce that. If you want to have more enforcement on top of that, it's very easy to add that. So if you have an int, but you want to make it only positive, that's very easy to set up.